at the end of the day, you don't know how you're going to react when someone close to you dies.
Yeah.
But you can think about, okay, if that ever happened to me,
Yeah.
what kind of person do I want to
Yeah.
be in grief?
There's days, for example, where I'm super wound up, like whether it be a lot on the go with work, like personal business, family. I know that if I meet you right away with how I'm truly feeling, you're not going to get the best version of me.
I reflect on times that in our marriage, you've been like, hey, Mariah, I think you need to go on a walk right now. Or I think you need to go process that. I think you need to maybe go pray about that in a very kind way. And then I'm like, that's exactly what I need right now. But I am too in my situation or in my grief or in my anxiety to even recognize that. So today we're going to talk about one thing that we think is important to learn or begin to wrap your mind around before you get married. And that thing is learning how to cope with the mess that is life.
Yeah. Life throws us a lot of curveballs. Like I think, people pass away. We get diagnoses that are unexpected. We lose jobs. There's a lot of tragedy and even just like ongoing stress that comes with life. And I think it's so important for people to learn what it looks like to deal with stresses and cope with the negative components of life in a healthy way.
Because the stresses will come.
Yeah, the stresses will come. It's like, it's not a matter of if it will come, it's how will you deal with it when it does come. And something I've realized is when it comes to marriages being broken apart, when it comes to families being destroyed, a lot of it stems back to the parents or the individuals in the relationship not being able to healthily cope with stress. So it's like turning on each other when tragedy happens or a child gets a diagnosis, or turning to gambling or heavy drinking and drug use when things aren't going well at work. And time after time again, we see marriages and families break apart because individuals in that family or in that relationship don't know how to productively deal with stress. And I think that this is an ongoing thing that we continue to learn as individuals. It's not like, oh, I now have mastered stress or how to deal with grief, for example. I really do think that there's individuals, there's people, and there's two, almost like if we look at it through the lens of like a choose your own adventure, there's two ways you can deal with stress. Again, this is super simplified. But it's like negative ways. So it's like the route or the arena of like gambling,
like escapism,
drugs,
almost.
escapism, addiction to social media, video gaming even, like things that are positive, but when they're done in an excessive way could be a negative thing. And then there's positive things like exercise. Again, exercise could be a negative thing as well, but like generally exercise is a positive thing.
Counseling.
Going out in nature, counseling, prayer, journaling, stuff like that. And I think that the process of maturing as an adult and becoming better is making sure that a majority of the way you cope with stress, grief, loss is through positive coping mechanisms as opposed to through negative.
Yeah, that's really good. I think too, like at the end of the day, you don't know how you're going to react when someone close to you dies. But you can think about, okay, if that ever happened to me, what kind of person do I want to be in grief? Do I want to be someone that is pursuing health, or do I want to be someone that just like falls to my every desire when that happens?
And it's something that I think about too is like, it's not a surprise that right now there's a lot of economic instability. It's like, how are you going to respond when you lose money? And is it a healthy way? Is it an unhealthy way? Obviously, like, I think there's wisdom in holding money and holding possessions lightly because they come and go. But when you do lose money, what are like built-in mechanisms that you've worked on over years that makes you respond to losing that 10 grand or that 20 grand or that 30 grand or that $300 in a way that's healthy? And I think that something to note is that it's not just like these big catastrophic griefs or events that we're talking about. It's like even how to cope with stressful days. And I think that sometimes when work is stressful or there's a lot of things on the go, we can be really wound up. And I think that this same principle applies to how you unwind. So I think some people will unwind with having, 5 or 6 drinks a night. Over time, that damages your body. And if that results in you, for example, getting drunk and being more aggressive, that over a long period of time could be a really negative thing.
Yeah.
So maybe instead of drinking, you want to go for a run, or maybe you want to journal, or verbally process with a spouse. And I think it's so important to really learn yourself and undergo a process of determining, like, okay, how do I best unwind? How do I best cope with the different stuff of life and the mess of life, and in a way that's more healthy than it is unhealthy?
Yeah. I'd love to hear you reflect on, like, maybe times in your life where you did have more negative coping mechanisms, and then maybe what you've replaced them with since.
Yeah, I think that there were times in my life where a negative coping mechanism would be kind of overwork. Like, so if work is stressful, just throw myself more into work. Yeah. I would say there's times...
Because is that like a distraction for you from whatever is going on?
Yeah. And it would make me more wound up. And it's almost like I would escape into this identity of being a high achiever. On the outside looking in, it's almost like something that people will celebrate, like, oh, he's so hardworking.
Yeah.
But I knew that I was becoming more wound up, more stressed, wasn't getting good sleep. And it wasn't actually a positive thing. But now there's, like, I have more healthy weekly routines. Like, I'll take one day, for example, a week where I'm just resting. We'll hang out, we'll go for walks. I would say something that's more regular for me is going for runs. I'll go for like long runs for an hour to 2 hours, and I'm able just to unwind or disconnect from the day in a way, or even just reflect on the day in a way that's healthy for my body, for my psychology, and for my emotions as well.
Yeah, I feel like you've added a lot more like white space in your life.
Yeah.
Like just time for processing, time for thinking, time for dreaming.
Yeah. And that's something I have to grow in still, but if I compare myself 7 years ago to now, that's increased and improved in a pretty significant way. How about you? What would you say?
I think a negative coping mechanism I used to do / still catch myself doing is, I think before it would show itself in like watching a lot of TV. So like binging, staying up late, and just like watching episode after episode. And I think that like almost using that TV to fill the space of instead me thinking through my anxieties or like being confronted with my thoughts. Yeah. And I noticed that sometimes, even still now, but instead of TV, it's like social media.
Yeah.
Or it's like a podcast. Or like kind of always having something going in my ear.
Yeah.
And I think what I've learned to replace that with is processing whatever anxieties I'm feeling verbally. I think because naming them is so big for me. So whether that's to you or a counselor or whoever, just be like, hey, I've actually been really worried about this. Because the more I keep it inside or like distract myself from it, the worse it gets. Yeah. So there's that. And then another thing I've tried to implement in my life is more silence and solitude. So that could be just when I wake up in the morning, literally just taking that 10 minutes before I start getting ready, just to look outside, look out the window, and just have like no noise. Yeah. Or to go on a walk.
Yeah. Something I think about often is how much we as humans, especially in this like digital age, we cope with noise. Like even when I'm doing things that should be unwinding, like say I'm washing the dishes or folding clothes, I have like a show on in the background or I'm listening to a podcast. Yeah. And maybe the content on the podcast or on the show aren't unhealthy, but it's just still noise and you almost want to be lost in the noise or you put news on in the background. But it's like, there's something to be said about just that, like you said, silence and solitude. And for me, I'm trying to replace times of, I guess, where I'd be tempted to put on noise with prayer, like listening to God and talking to him. And like, obviously if I'm spending the whole time like talking to God or talking to myself, that's more noise. But I realize that something that is so grounding for me is just like listening to God and allowing him to remind me of who I am to him and who he is to me. And it's such a like a grounding practice for me that I'm really thankful for it. And I think that obviously there are people who are with us who aren't religious, but you have to find your version of that. And maybe it's just going for silent walks. Maybe it's like putting on white noise. It's so funny because even that is noise. But allowing yourself to take times where you're just left alone with your thoughts. And you're not just like working yourself into more stress by like catastrophizing or thinking highly of your mess, but allowing your mind to almost like compartmentalize and disconnect from the thing that's causing you stress or grief.
Yeah, because I think like maybe it depends on personalities, but for me, I will really try to avoid thinking about and like confronting whatever's making me anxious or nervous or causing me grief. Yeah. I'll like really try to avoid that because I don't know why. It seems like too emotional for me, or it's just too hard to work through. But if I like force myself to go on that walk without any headphones, without anything, and typically I'm praying, I'm able to like see what comes up for me. Yeah. And I feel like it takes time sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes like, 5-10 minutes isn't going to be enough for you to really be like, oh, what's coming up for me right now? And noticing like where your mind goes to, because your mind will go to like what's stressing you out most often.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to note is like this whole conversation surrounding finding positive ways to cope with stress is not just protective for you, but it's also protective for those around you. Like there's days, for example, where I'm super wound up, like whether it be a lot on the go with work, like personal business, family, the things around me, that I know that if I meet you right away with how I'm truly feeling, you're not going to get the best version of me. But after a 25-minute run even, when I get my like lungs pumping and I'm getting fresh air and I'm taking in the sights around me, there's something that's happening in my psychology and my emotions that's almost like re-regulating, so that the version you're getting of me is more chill, less testosterone, very relaxed, almost feeling like refreshed because I just accomplished a run and I got my heart rate up. And so because of that, you're protected. So you're not getting my wound up self. Yeah. You're getting my subdued, energized, excited self. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes me think of like how there are lots of times though where we as human beings don't have enough self-control to be like, I need to go on a walk right now. And I reflect on times that in our marriage you've been like, hey Mariah, I think you need to go on a walk right now. Or I think you need to go process that. I think you need to maybe go pray about that. And like in a very kind way. And then I'm like, that's exactly what I need right now. But I am too in my situation or in my grief or in my anxiety to even recognize that. It's like you want to stay in it.
Yeah.
You don't even want to bring yourself out of it.
I think it's something that's important to name is that life gets more and more stressful. And I remember, for example, when you're in grade 11 or grade 12, exam season is super stressful. But it's really like a week or 2 weeks a year. But it's like, as an adult, it's almost like every day or every month or every week is exam season. So instead of going like, oh, this is what I'm doing to cope with exam season, it's like, no, how am I designing my life in a way that I'm always having these release valves for the stress and for the grief and for the frustration that just normally comes with life. So instead of going like, oh, once a quarter or once every other month, I do this thing to release stress, it's like, no, how do you design your days? How do you design your weeks? How do you design your months in a way that almost like has these built-in release valves? Like every day I do 30 minutes of exercise. Every week I do a longer walk around the city or around the town I live in. And every month I go for maybe a day trip to a park that I like in my town. So that I know that I have this release valve coming at the end of the month. I have this release valve coming at the end of the week, and I also have this release valve coming at lunchtime or at the end of my day. So that you're constantly coming up with ways, and it won't be something that's like set in stone for everyone. Like you can't just copy and paste from someone else's life. You have to assess your personality and be like, okay, maybe mornings work best for me because I start the day off rested and calm and composed and unwinded. But maybe you're like, you know what? the evenings are best for that because I start work super early and I just need to get right to it.
Yeah.
And so you really have to design your life in a way that fits for the volume of stress and grief that you experience throughout the given week, and also fits for your personality.
I agree. I totally agree. I think also, though, it is important to get inspiration, and that might be a weird term, but to look at others in your life and see how did they deal with it when they lost their job?
Yeah.
How did they deal with a death in the family? And maybe that's not the way you'll react, but I think it's important to look at people you love and respect and see the healthy ways, things that they do.
And I think that, oh, sorry, finish that.
Yeah, just because, like, it's hard to just maybe know off the top of your head how you want to cope with things. Yeah. And so to get ideas from other people could be helpful.
And I think that there's positive and negative inspiration.
Yeah.
So sometimes someone becomes more healthy with their diet and exercise because they saw someone in their life that was really unhealthy. Yeah. But sometimes it's like the person who is very healthy, eats super clean, exercise super consistently is the person that inspires you. So it's like inspiration can come from both sides. It can come from the almost like negative inspiration side, or it can come from the positive inspiration side. And you use that as like fodder for developing your personal plan or life design. If you have any ways that you find work best for you when it comes to coping with stress or frustration or the negative elements of life, we'd love to see that. Drop that in the comments because I'm sure it'll help someone else.
And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe and share this video with someone who you think might like it or might want to hear or might want to engage in this content. But with that, we will see you guys next week.